Number one, God wants to keep the early church pure because they need to be strong as a small but quickly growing work of God. There needs to be a sense of purity and holiness in the beginning of the church, because it is going to spread like wildfire, and within 2 decades it's going to go as far as Rome. It's going to spread around the known world at an incredible rate. It's going to eventually spread all around the world, and Jesus said it would happen. Wherever the gospel is preached, what this woman did will be told as a memorial to her. Here we are in Tucson, and we're looking at the scriptures that Jesus said that it would spread around the world. And so could it be that he could not allow there to be those who had either were non-believers, who wanted to look, they were tares, but they wanted to look like wheat, or those who were Christian, but they had major compromise? And God just wasn't going to allow major compromise at this point, because he needed the church to be much more powerful to be able to do the work that he's done. Now, by the time we get to Galatians being written, Corinth being written, there's all kinds of problems. If God was going to kill people if God was going to kill Christians because they compromised, then he'd have killed everybody at Corinth. They'd have all been gone, because the church had all kinds of problems. So this is something, when it is very small, doing a very significant work, it's like the very roots or the very foundation of the church itself. And perhaps God did this to Ananias and Sapphira in order to keep purity in the church. I have another thought. Maybe God, and this is me assuming that God killed them, okay? Because it doesn't say it. I have another thought. God wanted to show the severity of sin by making an example of sin when it first came into the church. God wanted to show the severity of sin by handling it severely when it first came into the church. I'm persuaded we don't know how bad sin is. We are the frog in the water that's been heated up. We don't really understand it. Jesus took our sin on the cross, and I think there was a time in history where people understood much better how severe sin is to a holy God. But I think we've lost that. I think the church is losing that more and more. In God, there is no shifting of shadows. Our heart is desperately wicked. That's what the Old Testament says. And people don't like that desperately wicked anymore. The God is basically good. Man is basically good argument is growing. Now, I also don't believe in Calvinism, there's a term total depravity. And I had, for years, said that I was a 3-point Calvinist, that total depravity was one of the areas that I believed in. I don't call myself any of the points now, and I could go over them all now, but I won't. But because I don't agree with Calvinism in total depravity, because when they say that someone is totally depraved, they say that they are unable to be saved. The person is so totally depraved, he's unable to be saved and will not be, because he is totally depraved. And Calvinists will use words like vipers in diapers to talk about babies, that they're just wicked, that a little bitty baby is wicked at heart. Now, I think they've gone too far. On the other side, there are people who will say, well, people are basically good, and I don't understand why God would judge anyone. And the balance is in the middle, and we probably all know our own hearts. And we know our tendency to justify what's in our hearts as not being as bad as what was in someone else's heart. And so God may here indeed be giving an example. Now, this happened in the Old Testament when God gave the law, and the law was given to show people sin, right? That's why the law was given. So when the law was given and they gave them the Sabbath command, on the first Sabbath, a guy defiantly went out and gathered firewood on the Sabbath. They were supposed to keep the Sabbath now, and they had rules. So you weren't supposed to do any work on it. So here goes the guy out, got firewood. It's a Sabbath. So what? He goes and collects firewood. So they get him and they bring him to Moses. And God has him put to death. And I go, God, he was collecting firewood. Maybe he was cold. And you'd put him to death? It's similar because the law had just started. The law was given. The man blatantly breaks the rules and he is put to death for it. But later on, there's all kinds of people that break the Sabbath and they're not put to death. Ananias and Sapphira, spoiler alert, both die because of their conspiring, and God takes their life. It's similar. I wonder if God isn't showing us the severity of sin. Maybe it's something we ought to ponder on and that we ought to really learn. We ought to really take it from both the account of the law and the guy collecting firewood and Ananias and Sapphira coming into the church thinking that they were going to manipulate the system.